Okay, so you should be finding this paper that I gave you in class. If you don't have this paper, it is attached that you can fill it out. It's your characterization notes. So today we're going to talk about characterization. So let's start with the essential question. How does understanding characterization help us to understand the story? So what is characterization? As we read through, as we go through this PowerPoint presentation, remember you're writing the red words, the ones that are written in red lettering. You're writing those in your blanks in your note sheet, okay? So characterization is when an author shows a character's personality by how the character looks, acts, talks, and interacts with other characters. There are two different types of character traits. Implicit character traits, these are inferred or guessed, and they're shown by the character's actions or words. The author doesn't come right out and tell us if they're implicit. They give us little clues. And there are also explicit character traits. Explicit are stated. They are right out there in the open. The author would come out and say, okay, Greg is a generous person. Okay, they aren't giving us clues that he's generous. They're coming out and telling us that he's generous. So for example, generous. Richard was a generous person. So that is stated or explicit. They came right out and told us that Richard was generous. Richard gave away lots of money to anyone who needed it. There, that statement is implicit, whereas you have to make an inference. So you know when someone gives away lots of money to people who need it, that they're generous. So just make sure you're writing those red words in the arrows there, just to help you to solidify the meanings of those terms. So well-developed characters, let me move myself here. Well-developed characters help to make very powerful stories. So if you have a round character, a really well-developed character, somebody that you know a lot about, it makes for a better story, okay? You don't want a boring character, okay? So ways to identify character traits in a story. So in the video that you watched yesterday, it told us that there was an acronym, STEAL, S-T-E-A-L, that could help us to remember the ways to identify character traits. So the S stands for what the character says, the T, what the character thinks, okay? The E, the character's effect on other people, okay? Does the character annoy others? Does the character mean to other people? A, the character's actions, what the character actually does, and what the character looks like, or their physical traits. Are they tall? Are they short? Okay, do they have red hair? Okay, those are all ways to identify them. Now this is really important. When asked to explain a character's traits, it's important that you first state the trait. Okay, and that's often what you would do in elementary school. You would just say, oh, well, this person is kind, okay? For our purposes, we're going to be using specific examples then of that trait from the text. We're going to be pulling text evidence from the text to back up our statement of trait, okay? And then third, make the connection between the example and the trait. And this is how you're explaining your answer. So you're saying, this is the trait that I think that this character has. This is why, because the examples from the text, and then explaining how that example, how you know that that example is true, okay? So we're gonna make sure that we use those three ways to explain a character's traits when we do it. So here is an example. You say Brian is brave because he travels down the river and overcomes many obstacles. So that's okay, but it's not great, all right? So a good example would be Brian is brave because while traveling down the river, he jumps in the water to save his sister, even though he's afraid of the water. When you are afraid and you still do it, it shows bravery, okay? So you're answering and saying that you're showing the trait that he's brave. Then you're using evidence from the text about how he jumps in the water to save his sister, even though he's afraid of the water. And then you're making this connection that when you're afraid and you still do it, it shows bravery. So that just explains how this is proof that Brian is brave, okay? So here, stating the trait, giving the example, and making the connection. So that's what we're going to be trying to do in our work today. Often a rating prompt will ask you to identify a person's dominant or prominent trait, and that's what we're going to be looking for. What really jumps out to you? This person is really this, right? Okay, really describes them well. It's the person's number one or biggest trait, and it's one word more than any other word that best describes the character, okay? So hopefully you got those notes down. They're going to be very important to refer to when we're filling out our examples and trying to explain them today in our next activity. So if you didn't get any of those red text words written down in your notes, you need to find the place that you need to pause in the video and get those filled in, okay? Like I said, you're going to be using this to do the next activity. See you shortly.